We've got a fresh update on the Clarity Act, and it appears Democrats are pushing forward with the legislation. Votes are anticipated this week, but a massive winter storm is complicating the timeline. And this matters significantly because when schedules shift in Washington, D.C., legislative momentum can evaporate with it. So in this video, I'm walking you through the latest developments, what's transpiring behind closed doors, what committees actually accomplished during markup sessions, and why the market is monitoring this so intensely right now. We're also emerging from one of the most brutal weeks we've witnessed in months for crypto ETF flows. There was a substantial wave of capital leaving crypto funds, and it's the type of data that disrupts sentiment even when the fundamental long-term investment thesis remains intact. So I'm going to dissect those outflows, what they probably indicate, and what I'm monitoring next. The outflow crisis. We just witnessed approximately $1.7 billion exit crypto funds in what's being labeled the worst week since November 2025. Which tells you something critical. Even though that's only a couple months ago, the market can pivot from greedy to fearful incredibly fast. Bitcoin outflows reached about $1 billion, representing the largest single-week outflow we've experienced since that November period. Ethereum witnessed roughly $630 million depart, and XRP saw around $18.2 million in outflows. The key point is the relative pressure isn't identical across these digital assets. Because here's what's noteworthy. That $630 million on Ethereum represents approximately 3.5% to 3.7% of spot ETH ETF assets, depending on which day you're measuring. That's substantial. That's not background noise. That's risk-off capital exiting the building. And when Bitcoin loses $1 billion in 1 week, that's not retail panic selling. That's large institutional allocators reducing exposure, degrossing positions, or rebalancing portfolios. XRP's outflow figure is smaller, and partially that's because the ETF base is smaller. But it also reveals XRP isn't experiencing the same degree of forced liquidation pressure in the ETF wrapper right now compared to ETH and BTC. Now, does this mean XRP is completely safe, or XRP is going to moon tomorrow? Absolutely not. This isn't financial advice. What it means is, if you're attempting to interpret what Wall Street is doing, you monitor flows. Flows don't predict the future, but they reveal positioning. And positioning is the factor that creates violent price movements when news breaks. So what triggered the outflows? Typically, it's not a single catalyst. When you observe a week like this, it's a combination of profit-taking after a rally, macroeconomic uncertainty, interest rates, dollar strength, risk appetite shifts, headline risk around regulation, and honestly, traders simply trying to front-run or avoid a drawdown. The market isn't patient when the calendar is packed with uncertain events. And right now, the calendar is absolutely loaded with uncertain events. Votes, markup sessions, amendments, government shutdown discussions, agency coordination meetings, all of it. Timeline. All right, now let's dive into the Clarity Act update, because this is where things get fascinating. There's an article from Eleanor Terrett that contains a lot of valuable detail. And the major headline is this: it's developing into another uncertain week for market structure legislation, because the Senate Agriculture Committee markup could be postponed by a massive winter storm that struck Washington on Sunday. Heavy snowfall and icy conditions have already generated travel complications. Flights get delayed, members can't return, and suddenly your Tuesday vote becomes Thursday morning. And then, potentially, next week. And then the market starts pricing in. Nothing is getting accomplished. And that's precisely what occurred here. The Senate canceled the voting session that was scheduled. And the expectation is committee members start returning Tuesday afternoon. You're watching this Tuesday morning. So today you should start observing senators flying back into Washington to prepare to vote and work on the legislation. The markup was scheduled for mid-afternoon, But with significant flight delays and cancellations, it becomes a very real logistical challenge. Can enough members physically return in time to convene the meeting and vote? That sounds absurd, but that's Washington. Sometimes policy gets determined by weather patterns. Now here's the more significant issue beyond the weather. The bill remains partisan in public appearances. Only Republican committee members have been openly supporting it, even after additional weeks of bipartisan negotiations that delayed the original markup that was supposed to occur on January 15th. So you've got two layers of uncertainty: schedule uncertainty and coalition uncertainty. And markets despise both. At the same time, the industry has largely been supportive of the latest text that was released because it attempts to protect non-custodial software developers and infrastructure providers by keeping regulation more narrowly focused on intermediaries, rather than treating the protocol and the users like they're the criminals. That's a massive philosophical battle, because if you regulate the protocol like it's a banking institution, you destroy innovation. But if you don't regulate intermediaries at all, you get chaos, scams, and consumers getting wrecked. So the optimal approach is regulate the businesses that custody funds, broker transactions, and market products without criminalizing code and open-source infrastructure. And this is where you're hearing the biggest democratic sticking points: DeFi, the treatment of decentralized finance. And one of the most candid things stated in this entire debate is that a lot of the DeFi friction stems from an education gap. Some senators don't genuinely understand what DeFi is, what non-custodial means, what a liquidity pool is, what an automated market maker is, or why a developer writing code isn't equivalent to a company holding customer funds. So what happens? They apply the old financial system mentality to the new financial system. They try to force-fit terms, broker, dealer, exchange, issuer, onto things that don't map cleanly. And that's how you get ineffective legislation. And look, I understand. Not everyone needs to be a blockchain engineer. But if you're writing the regulations for a technology that tens of millions of Americans interact with, you do need to grasp the fundamentals. We've got approximately 60 million Americans who have engaged with crypto in some capacity. That's not a niche hobby anymore. That's voters, businesses, tax revenue, innovation, and yes, risk. The objective should be keep America at the forefront of this, protect consumers, and create regulations that actually function in real life. New amendments and payment rails. Now, another complication. There were new amendments filed ahead of the markup, including the Bipartisan Credit Card Competition Act from Senators Roger Marshall, Dick Durbin, and Peter Welch. That legislation would require large banks to allow at least 2 unaffiliated networks other than Visa and MasterCard on credit cards, giving merchants more choice on routing and processing. Translation? It's an attempt to reduce the Visa-MasterCard duopoly power and give merchants leverage on fees and routing. And I'll just state it. The dream scenario down the road is you go to pay and you see Visa, MasterCard, and then modern payment rails. You see crypto rails, you see faster settlement, you see cheaper routing. That's where this entire thing is heading. It's not about number go up, it's about infrastructure transformation. Understanding the Senate structure. Now let's discuss the Senate structure here because many people get confused. There are essentially 2 lanes right now. The Senate Agriculture Committee is handling the CFTC side, commodities oversight. The Senate Banking Committee is handling the SEC side, securities, banking issues, market structure in that lane. And because digital assets can have characteristics of both commodities and securities, they're attempting to coordinate 2 different bills or 2 different sections that ultimately have to work together. If those 2 pieces don't align, you get conflict, you get turf wars, you get agencies fighting, and then companies and builders get stuck in the middle. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand provided an update, and she sounded genuinely optimistic. She said senators have been working on a bipartisan basis for the last 6 months, and that both committees are writing pieces that address different parts of the market. The key message from her was essentially, we need rules of the road, we need consumer protections, and we need clarity so businesses don't relocate offshore. And that's the part people underestimate. Regulation isn't just about restriction, it's also about permission. Large capital does not deploy at scale into a space that can be shut down arbitrarily or retroactively prosecuted because the rules were unclear. Clarity isn't just good vibes. It's the difference between institutions treating this as a serious market and treating it like a casino. Gillibrand also made a point about underbanked and unbanked Americans. And that's a major narrative shift, because for a long time, crypto got framed as speculation only. But the real argument that wins in Washington is access, inclusion, payment efficiency, and competitiveness. It's not let me gamble, it's let me build, let me transact, let me compete. Now, let's bring in the update that circulated from Milk Road, because it lays out the mechanics in plain English. The Senate pushed its vote timing, and this matters. A vote here isn't final passage, it's procedural. The Agriculture Committee is holding a business meeting to mark up the bill, propose amendments, and vote on whether to advance it. That's step 1. You don't get law from step 1, but step 1 is where momentum initiates. And if you want to understand what the market is really trading right now, it's not just price charts. It's probability. Probability of advancement. Probability of delay. Probability of bipartisan support. Probability of final passage later. That's what's getting repriced every time the schedule changes. Why is this significant? Because for years, crypto has been in regulatory limbo. The SEC and the CFTC have battled over jurisdiction. Projects have launched. Exchanges have operated, billions have flowed, and the rules have been unclear. This bill is attempting to draw lines. Which assets fall under SEC oversight? Which fall under CFTC oversight? And what's the framework for launching tokens and trading them without living in fear of enforcement by surprise? If this advances, the market interprets it as, the US is finally building the highway instead of handing out speeding tickets randomly. And that's bullish for sentiment, even if rulemaking takes time. Short-term market impact. Now, what do I think matters most in the short term? The vote is procedural, but sentiment moves fast. If it advances, you'll see headlines spin it as momentum, and markets will trade that. If it stalls, the narrative becomes gridlock, and regulatory overhang persists. And in a market already dealing with ETF outflows, risk assets don't need another excuse to stay choppy. Now, there was also a spicy clip from Rebecca Walzer that made the rounds. And I'm not going to lie, I smiled too. The energy was basically, it's ridiculous to try to ban yield on stablecoins. You're trying to frame the future with the past. And she hits a real point. If regulators try to ban every attractive feature of new rails just to protect old rails, they don't stop innovation. They just push it offshore. And then you lose oversight anyway. The real goal should be, allow innovation, require transparency, protect consumers, and stop fraud without nuking the whole category. What this means for XRP. All right. Now let's talk about the part you really care about. What could the Clarity Act do for assets like XRP? I want to be careful here because people hear one sentence and run with it. But conceptually, if the Senate language and the broader market structure framework treats something like XRP more clearly as a digital commodity in the right lane, that's huge. Why? Because it would put XRP's status into a clearer statutory framework rather than leaving everything to case law interpretation and enforcement uncertainty. If you create a cleaner digital commodity lane, then you get clearer rules for spot markets on registered venues, clearer coordination requirements so you don't get duplicative regulation, and clearer compliance expectations for exchanges and platforms that want to list and offer products. And that matters, because the biggest barrier for institutions isn't, does the tech work? The barrier is, can we touch this without regulatory blowback? Institutions want clean lanes, clean reporting, clean custody standards, and clean market structure. If XRP is treated in a clearer lane, compliance friction drops, and that changes who's willing to use it, and how big they can use it, and what kinds of products can be built around it. Stablecoins and tokenized collateral. This also intersects with stablecoins and tokenized collateral. If you have clearer rules for stablecoin issuance, think Genius Act type frameworks people have been discussing, and clearer rules for digital commodity spot and derivatives markets, then you can start designing products where settlement assets, stablecoins, and tokenized instruments connect into regulated venues with predictable margin and collateral rules. That's not hype. That's how real markets scale. Now, does this mean XRP gets a magic switch flipped and everything changes overnight? No. Even if Congress passes laws, rulemaking takes time. The agencies have to implement, market participants have to register, platforms have to build compliance programs, and yes, that can take years. But the direction matters because capital front-runs direction. And speaking of agencies, the SEC and CFTC harmonization event was rescheduled to Thursday, January 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern. That's important because for years these agencies have been essentially jockeying for turf, but now they're being pushed toward coordination because Congress is trying to define lanes. If we get more coordination, even before final laws pass, that can reduce random enforcement shocks, and that alone can calm markets. Now, one more source of uncertainty: shutdown risk. There's another funding bill moving forward, and we don't know how that's going to shake out. If the government hits a serious shutdown, timelines slip, meetings slip, staff work slows, negotiations slow, everything slows. And in crypto, where sentiment trades in milliseconds, slower can feel like dead. So I'm hoping people can sit down and work it out. Because a month-long shutdown doesn't just delay a vote, it delays the entire pipeline of progress. And that means the market stays stuck in maybe mode longer. Now, zooming out, here's what I want you to watch this week. First, watch whether the Agriculture Committee markup actually happens on time and whether it advances. Even if you don't care about committee procedure, the market cares about optics. Moving versus stalled. Second, watch what the amendments actually try to change. If amendments start targeting DeFi too aggressively, the industry will push back hard. If amendments clarify protections for non-custodial developers and infrastructure, that can bring more support. Third, watch the Banking Committee lane. People keep focusing on one committee, but the market structure framework is a two-lane bridge. If one side moves and the other side doesn't, you still don't get the final clarity everyone wants. Fourth, watch ETF flows. If flows stabilize, the market can breathe. If outflows continue while the legislative timeline gets pushed around, you can get that slow grind lower where everyone gets bored, and then suddenly a headline hits and it snaps. All right, that's the update. And again, if you got value out of this, please hit like. It seriously helps the algorithm. And if you want to learn how to grow your wealth with a real system, check out my 100x Club membership. Inside, you'll get the XRP Millionaire Blueprint, exclusive weekly stock alerts for high-potential opportunities, and a step-by-step framework to help you build wealth with smarter decision-making and better risk management. It's all in the pinned comment. Make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. Word count check. This script maintains similar length and pacing to the original while completely reframing the language and structure. It's designed for a 16-minute video with natural speaking rhythm and clear section breaks for editing.